What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Cinema Corner. My name's Josh, and today I'm going to be reviewing Black Phone 2, which is a sequel to the original, which came out in 2021. I think the original is an overlooked horror gem. It was in my top 10 list in the year that it came out, and I rewatched it recently. I think it holds up. Ethan Hawke is great as the Grabber, and I was excited to see what they would do with a sequel to this, because although I think the original has enough closure that it could be a standalone film and doesn't need a sequel, Blumhouse, of course, wanted to capitalize on the major success that it was. The story of Black Phone 2 picks up 3 years after the events of the first. Finney, played by Mason Thames, and Gwen, his sister, played by Madeline McGraw, are still dealing with the fallout of the events of the first film, in which Finney was held captive by a serial killer. And I'm going to open this review with the assumption that you've seen the first movie, or at the very least don't care about being spoiled for the plot. Because if you watch that movie, yes, the Grabber, played by Ethan Hawke, did die at the end. So how exactly are they going to bring him back for a sequel, you might ask? Well, Derrickson decided to take a page right out of Wes Craven's book and bring the Grabber's vengeful spirit into people's dreams. He's pretty much Freddy Krueger. It seems like the general response to that idea is that people were rolling their eyes. I think it was a pretty earnest homage. I mean, it's not like Freddy Krueger is a trademarked character and no one else is allowed to write a supernatural killer into their films that invades people's dreams. But it is a comparison that you simply can't avoid making. I mean, I can't think of another character in the horror landscape that does what Freddy Krueger does, but that's exactly what they've decided to do with this sequel, and it simply makes sense because of the supernatural elements from the previous film. Gwen having dreams and visions, being able to see events from the past and future. And the focus of the plot for this sequel actually shifts from Finney more towards Gwen, which I think was a pleasant subversion of expectations, and it allows it to delve more into the supernatural elements that were mostly just hinted at in the first movie. They did not play as big of a role as they do here. There are specific moments that feel like they were ripped straight out of A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors, which is probably my favorite of the sequels. So once again, pleasant homage. It wasn't something that felt too on the nose to me, and it didn't bother me. I wasn't thinking, oh, I wish I was watching A Nightmare on Elm Street instead, because this is its own story, and I think there are enough original spins on the concept that it works. Something else that I want to point out right off the bat is I love when a horror movie also feels like a character-driven drama, and this often does. The first half is slower paced. I would personally use the word deliberately, but I know some audiences might not tolerate the pace and consider it to be too slow. I enjoyed it. I think it does a good job of diving into the headspace of the characters, and it reflects on the aftermath of what happened in the first movie and how it's affecting these characters, especially since they're so young. They're, I believe, in high school during the events of this film. It certainly helps that Mason Thames and Madeline McGraw are both excellent. They do such a good job, and it's such a roll of a dice when you cast children in your movie. And I thought they were great in the first film, and it really feels like they're kind of coming of age in this one and flexing their acting muscles. I was really impressed by some of the emotional beats that are present in this sequel. There are certainly points where the dialogue feels a little too YA for my taste. It's just kind of corny. But the actors do such a good job that they almost sell it. Although I will say, I think the script tries to one-up the script of the first movie too much with Gwen's insults. Sometimes it works, like when she calls somebody a sanctimonious twat, but other insults like jizz mopper just didn't roll off the tongue as well. Let's talk about Ethan Hawke as the Grabber, because I think he's kind of the selling point here, as he was in the first movie, but he's no longer just a deranged serial killer kidnapping people. He is now a vengeful spirit that is attacking people through Gwen's dreams. I thought he was creepy as ever, and his screen time is limited, at least in the first half, but I think that's something that works. There's sort of an ominous buildup of his presence. That's the way to do it in horror. You never want to show your monster too much, and I think this movie does a good job with that. And the violence, for the most part, is fairly limited. There's much more of a focus on suspense. But when it does get violent, it is extremely graphic, I think much more so than the first movie. And perhaps my favorite thing about Black Phone 2 is the style. We all know that Scott Derrickson loves his Super 8 style that he uses in the snuff films and Sinister, and of course Gwen's dreams in the first film, but because the dreams are much more prominent in the story of this one, as a whole it is much more stylized. Lots of scenes that utilize that grainy 16mm fashion, and it makes the movie so much more creepy to me. I don't know why it has that effect, but it does. This time he also transitions between the dream world and reality a lot, and during those transitions it goes from film grain to what is clearly digital. And the setting for Black Phone, for a majority of the runtime at least, is this youth camp that is set, I believe, in the Rocky Mountains. Very creepy environment. I like that they switch it up from the first movie, and the snowy environments do a lot of favors for the style. With that said, the movie does have some issues, so let's dive into those next. First and foremost, too many useless side characters that witness the supernatural events, and for the most part, I think their presence makes the film less scary. There's one couple that we don't even see when the characters first arrive at this youth camp, and I just found myself asking, what is it exactly that you do here? Initially, I was thinking maybe they were just here to beef up the body count, but I don't want to spoil where things go, so I'll just leave it at too many side characters. Speaking of those side characters that bothered me, there was too much comic relief, specifically with this one couple, these super judgmental, uptight Christians. It just messed with the tone, especially when a lot of the subject matter here is so serious and traumatic, specifically to the main characters. Another issue is that in retrospect, I think the grabber should have been more threatening in this movie. In the first film, you felt the danger, and here you certainly do in a couple of specific sequences, but by the end, I felt that the payoff could have been a little bit better. For all of the buildup and teasing that they do of his presence when he actually shows up to attack the characters, it's not quite as intense as I was hoping for. And there are a couple of instances where Derrickson uses cheap, predictable jump scares in which something pops out from the dark accompanied by a loud, startling noise, and it happens exactly where and when you expect it. I don't have an issue with jump scares in general, I just don't like when they're not original and they don't subvert my expectations, or at least attempt to. Even Sinister, which I would consider to be Derrickson's best film, succumbs to this occasionally. Something else that was a bit of a nitpick for me is that this is the type of sequel that likes to dive backwards and explore things in the first movie that we didn't know were there all along. It really bothers me when sequels do this. I think it makes thematic sense in this film the way they do it, but it just felt too perfect. It felt like they wanted to tie everything together in a perfect bow because the story here explores the grabber's history and some things that he did at this youth camp, but they also try to tie that into the family history of Finney and Gwen's parents, and I just didn't feel like it was a necessary connection to make. You could remove that connection, and the movie would still be good, and it would just feel less forced and more organic. Two more quick nitpicks that I have. There is a lot of exposition, and it's the kind of exposition in which the movie will reveal something to the audience visually, and then the characters spew it out verbally a couple of scenes later, and it just feels like they're speaking down to the audience. Like, I'm not 10 years old. I understand what you're conveying to me with the visuals. You don't need to double down and then explain it to me. Last little nitpick, I do think that they sometimes stretch the rules as to what the grabber can and can't do, because he's not a physical, real being. He is a spirit, and the movie never quite establishes a set of rules of this is what he can do, this is what he can't do. And it leaves you wondering, okay, why doesn't he just do the things that he does in the third act earlier? He could have probably progressed the plot along quicker, and it feels like the buildup is just there for the audience. Because I think the first half of this movie is superior to the second half. The payoff is a little weaker than I wanted, but overall, I think this is solid. I actually saw it a second time today because I wasn't sure what I wanted to rate it, and I am still kind of torn on it between a 3 and a 3.5. If I could give it 3.25, I would, but since I have to settle for one or the other, I think this is a solid companion piece to the first movie, and I'm going to give it 3.5 stars. Did this sequel need to be made? Absolutely not. Is it still a solid, competently made follow-up? I would say yes. It's not going to be everybody's cup of tea because it switches things up so much from its predecessor, but I enjoyed it. I would recommend that you check it out and form your own opinion. And if you do, be sure to come back to this video, drop down into the comments, and let me know what your thoughts are. Before you take off, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I'll catch you guys in the next review. See you later.